Okay, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Cafe Oleh. My name is Jay, and here at Cafe Oleh with Nefesh, we go over the everyday Hebrew you need here in Israel to succeed. Whether that's reading and paying your bills, going grocery shopping and reading nutritional labels, keeping up with the news, striking up a conversation, dating, flirting, job interviewing, complaining, all the everyday things you do in your native language in your country of origin, but here in Israel in modern Hebrew. As always, we want to hear from you what topics you'd like us to cover. You can always write to us by email at hebrew@nbn.org.il. If you're joining us live on Zoom, you can write to us in the chat. Hopefully, all 240, 50 of us, which is absolutely amazing. We just ask that you keep the chat to not things related to Hebrew and learning and Nefesh B'Nefesh, not get into personal conversations. You can do that on your own time. You can also see all of our previous lessons up on YouTube. Just go to youtube.com, type in Cafe Oleh. The very first thing you'll see is a shortened playlist of all of our previous lessons. You just click on View Full Playlist. And you'll see all of our lessons. There's more than 100 up there. The last, I would say, 20 to 30, if not more, have the spreadsheets that we go through in each class. But we always want to hear from you what topics you'd like us to cover. You can always be in touch with us by email. Today, and one other small piece of housekeeping. Next week, and we've talked about this before in terms of calendar and timekeeping and things like that. Next week, North America enters what we call here in Israel Sha'on Kaitz. Sha'on Kaitz is daylight saving time. Israel does not enter it until the end of the month, along with the European Union. So there's a gap of a couple weeks, but this program takes place in Israel. Hopefully for not just Olim, but people thinking about Olim. So we will keep the time of 8 p.m. Israel time. If you are joining us from North America or anywhere else in the world, please consult the time change if your clocks change next week, especially if they're going forward an hour. Keep that in mind when joining us live. That's on you. You're all adults. I know you can figure this out. With that, let's get started. Today's an important class, and this is part of a request from you, participants, and this series doesn't work unless we hear from you what topics you'd like us to cover. But it's also a topic we've talked about in the past, but we haven't talked about it on a larger level. We've talked about almost once a month, a very important topic, at least for me, and I know for you, which is media literacy. How to read the news in Hebrew at even the most beginner's level. Why? Because if you're living in Israel, breaking news and things that impact you immediately as a citizen are likely only going to be in Hebrew, at least at first in Hebrew. And there's often a lag, can be up to hours, if not days, until the same piece of news is translated and broadcast on English language channels or other languages. And so what we do is we've gone through major news websites in Israel and gone through the anatomy of the page, as well as where's the headline, where's the subheadline, what to look for, what are the keywords to look for if this is something you need to watch or read further, or you can skip over, and then going and reading it together and understanding what's the language used in media in Israel. Very important lesson. Today, we're going to do a zoom out. We're going to talk about various media channels, particularly on TV and online. And it's going to go into some sample questions to help you talk about what channels you watch, what movies you've seen or TV you've watched. Those of you who are joining us for Cafe Oleh Conversations, these are going to be your conversation prompts for this week. But regardless, they're really good conversation starters because, frankly, we talk about watching things on TV or computer screen a lot here in Israel, and I'm going to explain why in just a second. So I'm going to open up the vocabulary for this week. If you have questions about this specific class, please write them in the Q&A. Anything else you can write in the chat, questions, comments, concerns, and so forth. So with that, let's get started. Just pull it up on my screen, just 1 second. Need to turn that off. Here it is. Okay, just 1 minute. Okay. View full screen. Okay. Hold on. Okay, let's get started. So we're going to talk about media in terms of what the media landscape looks like in Israel, particularly on TV. It also obviously is going to be online as well. But this is important to frame it, why TV is so important in Israel to get your news. And it comes from a sociological, if not anthropological term that was created specifically about Israel, but it's been used around the world. And the term in Hebrew is Medurat HaShevet. Medurat is a campfire. Shevet is a tribe. And when you put these two words together, this makes sense in an Israeli context. If you think about the original Chalutzim, the Zionist pioneers at the turn of the 20th century, the whole notion of the Shivtei Yisrael, the 12 tribes of Israel, we relate to the word tribe. And so therefore we relate to the word campfire, because campfire, whether we went to a summer camp or not, we know what it means to sit around a campfire. Not just we ourselves, but also civilization has been doing that for thousands and thousands of years as a means of warmth and getting and cooking food, but also of communication. And the term Medurat HaShevet, which can be translated as the tribe's campfire, is a term used, coined in Israeli society and used in other societies. Now, it's the central means of society to get information. Because again, think of that campfire 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago. You're sitting around it. You're not, again, just getting warm, just cooking food. You're telling what happened during the day, or you're just talking, right? It's the central place where you spoke. And in Israel, it's used exactly as it says here in English, the central means of a society to get information. For the first, up until the early 1990s, in the state of Israel, there was only one TV station. And all the radio stations were part of that one company. Okay. And it was literally called Arutz Harishon, the first station. Right. And that's how the vast majority of Israelis got their news and also got their entertainment. If you had a TV, or your friends had a TV, or the neighborhood had a TV, you sat around and watched it because there was only one station. For a long time, it was in black and white, even when color TV was introduced in the rest of the world. And that's how people got their information. They sat down at 8 o'clock every single night to watch the nightly news, right? 8 o'clock at night, still to this day, the main news broadcast in Israel comes on TV. We're going to go through the major TV stations in a second. And that was how people got their information. In the early 1990s, we've talked about this before, Israel opened up TV and radio broadcasting to commercial channels. And in the early 1990s, Channel 2 was born. It was the first commercial station in Israel, which subsequently became the most popular station, and it still is to this day, now called Channel 12. And this idea of where you get your information is obviously very relevant nowadays. When we see so much polarization here and in other places, this idea of what is your Medurat HaShevet, what is your Bible campfire, and where do you get your information, says a lot about who you are, what you, where, even where you're from in the country, but what you listen to, what are your views on certain things. For those of you with a more advanced Hebrew level, there is a great documentary series on one of the channels here, Channel 1, now called Channel 11 or Khan. And it's based on this term, and it's called Medurot HaShvatim. It pluralizes this term of the campfire, talk about all the polarizing and sort of subsections of Israeli society and how they came to a head and ended up very much at odds with each other. It's a really important watch if you can follow along in the Hebrew. We'll talk about how to follow along in this class. So first off, some important verbs when we're talking about consuming media in Israel. These are always really important to talk about. And also equally important for those of you who are just starting out to learn Hebrew or already learning for several years, these 4 verbs are the difference between a basic beginner's level and a more intermediate, getting to a more native level of Hebrew. First one is a great example of it. If you can use this verb on a regular basis, you are really good to go. The verb is litzpot. It's followed by the preposition be. Litzpot be. Litzpot be is to watch something on TV. or on a screen. Okay, proper Hebrew, we do not use the verb lirot. Lirot or lirot means to see. Okay, it means usually to see with your eyes. And obviously we're doing that, but it's to see something, anything happening. And yes, you will hear native Israelis say, Ma ra'ita b'televizia. What did you see on television? Technically, it's incorrect. And not only technically, you don't sound particularly educated if you say Ma ra'ita b'televizia. Instead, you want to say Matzafita b'televizia. What did you watch on TV? It's the difference, think of it, between see and watch. Just like in English, there are two different verbs, so too in Hebrew. Litzpot is the correct verb to use when we're talking about watching TV, watching something on our computer or on our mobile device or on a screen even. Litzpot be. Okay? אני צופה בחדשות בטלוויזיה. I'm watching the news on TV. Okay? That's how we use the verb. The next one, no less important when we're talking about media, is lehazin. Again, we have the verb to listen, to hear, lishmoa, or we have the verb to listen to. Just like in English, we have to see versus to watch. In Hebrew, we have the same thing. What the difference is, folks, hopefully you know the difference in your native language. I'm telling you the difference in Hebrew. I can say, אני שומע לרדיו, or אני שומע מוזיקה, or I can say, אני מאזין למוזיקה, or אני מאזין לרדיו. I am listening to music or to the radio. Okay? La'azin, by the way, comes from the same root from which we get oznaim, ears. So if you ever need to remember that, it's a great word to know. La'azin, to listen to. Lehakrin. Lehakrin is also an important verb. We're not necessarily the ones doing it sometimes, but sometimes we are. Or we're going to a place that has a hakrana, a screening of a film or of a documentary or something. Lehakrin is to screen. Okay, not to screen as in to filter out calls on your phone or to screen out something. It's to screen a film, to project a film. You could also translate it. Let me put that on here. Okay, just so it's clear. Project the film. Okay. So for example, if you're lucky enough to go to a hakrana bechora, you're going to a premiere screening of something. Okay. And finally, the verb lahashmiya. Lahashmiya is an interesting verb. Lahashmiya comes from the same root as lishmoa, to hear. Remember, I just talked about to hear versus to listen. Lahashmiya is the causative form of the same idea, to cause someone or something to hear music, i.e., to play music. So if I say, ani mashmiya muzika, I'm playing the music. You can infer from that that therefore I'm listening to it, not necessarily, but the point is I'm causing someone else to hear the music. This is the verb we use, to play music, not to play an instrument. Okay, and that's why I wrote music here, or to play song, music on a device, right? Excuse me. It is not to play an instrument. That's a different verb, and that's not what we're talking about here when we're talking about media and consuming media in Israel. We're talking about to play music as in to turn on the radio or to turn on YouTube or Spotify or whatever it may be. And we press play. The device is playing music, and by extension, we can also say, I am playing music by pressing play. Okay? Excuse me. All important words. Some important words when we talk about consuming media in Israel. Manui. Manui is a subscription. That could be a manui online, an online subscription to a platform like Netflix, Amazon, so forth. That could be a cable subscription, any kind of subscription. That could also, by the way, to be a magazine or a newspaper or a health fitness club, whatever it may be, is a manui in Hebrew. We use two different nouns in Hebrew to indicate a channel. And when I say channel, I'm talking about, again, media. That's all we're talking about today. And the difference is not really clear. Usually we're using the verb, noun, arutz. Arutz means a channel in the sense of when I'm calling out what channel do you watch or what channel are you watching, meaning like the whole brand of the station in which you're watching. First is the technical aspect, right? The exact frequency that this channel is tuned to in order to broadcast. That's the other word, which is afik. Afik you're going to hear in a much more technical setting. Arutz is the one you're going to hear in a much more marketing commercial setting, right? So when someone asks you, what channel are you watching, or what station is that on, or what channel is that on, you're going to use this word arutz. Okay, but just know that there is this other word afik because it's used every once in a while in Israeli society. Tachana means both a station in a physical sense, and it usually is the word that we use when we talk about a tachanat radio, a radio station, meaning the call letters or the number, the frequency number that goes with the radio station. We don't use it for other reasons than that. But Tachana is mainly a radio station in that respect. I'm going to add two more words here as we go because I see they're important to add. And one of them I think I know many of you should already know is this one. Ulpan. Ulpan. Many of you are studying in an ulpan. Some of you are thinking of it and planning on it. Some of you have already. Some of you have left an ulpan. Ulpan we normally think of in terms of Hebrew language. The original meaning of ulpan is a studio. Okay, and this is the term that we use whether it's for broadcasting, as in a TV station, or in that respect, a TV studio, excuse me, an ulpan televizia. It could be any other kind of studio. It could be an artist studio. It isn't just about Hebrew. It's a studio. It's a place where you go and do a specific type of work. If you're learning Hebrew, in the case of learning Hebrew, if it's for TV, both broadcasting as well as producing, ulpan, very important word when we're talking about content. The other word I should have added earlier, but I'm going to do it now because I just said it in English. And that's a very important word in 2024. Especially if it doesn't do the vowels incorrectly. There we go. Come on. All right. Very important word when we're talking about media and consuming media is the word tochen. Tochen is content. Listen to how I say the word in English, folks. Content, not the other way you pronounce it, and it means a totally different word in Hebrew. Content. It's the media that we consume. It's the stuff that we talk about all the time, whether it's TV, radio, news, film, series, whatever it may be. Content. Tochen. Right? Platforma. Platforma is pretty straight up, but this is the term that we use in Hebrew, whether you're talking about watching something online or on TV. And if it's online or if it's on TV, which network are you using? In the sense of, even though network is the next word, think of like Netflix versus Disney Plus versus Yes versus Hot. One of the terms that we use to describe those differences in how we access content is platform. The other one we can use is reshet. Reshet is simply a network. That could be a network of contacts. That could be a network online, right? That's one of the words that we use to describe the internet and things online. But it could also be, again, where you get the content that you consume. What's the name of it? Okay. Control, or specifically a remote control, especially for watching TV, but it could also be a screen, it could be your computer, it could be some other device, is a shalat. Shalat comes from the same root as the verb for to control something. So a shalat or a shalat rachok, which means more literally a remote control, is any device you use to control the channels or the volume or the power on a given device. And then this one is going to be very important. And when we talk about the history of Israeli media in a second, is a mamir. Mamir is a converter. It comes from the same verb lehamir, which is to convert, as in to convert money, to convert yeah, anything, any sort of objects. It's the verb also that's used to convert um, to or from religions other than Judaism. We don't use this verb when we talk about conversion to or from Judaism, but it is used because it means to convert. So it's not just converting currency or voltage. It can also be faith. It could be all sorts of other things, but we don't use it for um, Judaism. That verb is legayer. Okay, but it's not relevant to this class, so just want to put that out there. Next topic. So we're talking about where specifically TV, because as I said, that's a really important part of Israeli society and how we get our information. We need to talk about the different ways we get TV. It used to be everything was analog, you had an antenna, and that was it. Times have changed, even here in Israel. And there's three major ways that people get, especially TV in their homes, but it also could be internet, by the way. One is kabel. Kabel sounds just the same. It is cable. It's literally a cable line that goes into your home. Certain internet providers use this, and TV providers use a kabel. Other ones use a lavyan. Lavyan is a satellite. It could be your personal satellite. It could be the satellite for your building. But the point is, other TV providers use a satellite. And the third one, which is really important to understand whether or not you watch TV, whether or not you want to pay for TV service, is one that's provided free of charge to all Israelis, and it's called Idan Plus. Idan Plus is the local name for what's called DTT, or digital terrestrial television. Essentially, it goes like this. Israel, in the last decade, turned all of its broadcasting, radio and TV, from analog to digital. What's the difference? That's not my area of expertise, but just know that all broadcasts in Israel now are digital. In order to get TV into your home, you need to either have kabel or lavyan, and therefore a manui. You need a subscription to a cable service, or you have Idan Plus. Idan Plus is a free service where all you have to do is pay for a mamil. There's that word again, converter. It's a machine, it's a literal converter that connects to your TV and connects to Idan Plus. Idan Plus is a set of channels we're about to go through in a second that are considered the basic TV stations in all of Israel. Whether you have one TV provider or another, whether you like this channel or not, these are the channels that, according to the Ministry of Communications and a couple other broadcasting authorities in Israel, every household with a TV is entitled to get reception in their homes. Again, whether it's through Idan Plus, which is a box with this very small antenna that sits in your home. It's about this size. It looks like a router for your internet. Or you have cable or TV and you pay for it. The difference is, however, Idan Plus, there is no manui. You're paying for the box, the converter machine, and that's it. You're not paying a monthly manui to a cable company or a satellite TV company. Okay, that's the difference. What's included in Idan Plus is included in all the other packages you may get for your TV. And that's where we've gone through these channels before individually when talking about news, because all these channels, again, copy the original TV channel in Israel, Arutz Rishon, in that they provide news and they provide entertainment. Okay. The first one is the descendant of the first channel in Israel. Then it was called Harutz Rishon. The first channel was also channel 1. Now it's channel 11. And it's also known in Hebrew as Kan. Kan is the name of the company, is the name of the station. It's also known by literally saying channel 11, Arutz 11. No matter what platform you're on, whether it's Idan Plus, online, cable, satellite, it's all channel 11. Okay, channel 11 is public broadcasting. It's the first channel. It is public broadcasting. It's the equivalent of PBS in America, BBC in the UK, and so forth, and that it's a public broadcaster. And it has set the scene for what TV in Israel looks like. Again, all the TV stations in Israel, no matter how old or young they are, all have their central news broadcast at 8 o'clock p.m. because that's what they did on Channel 1 all those years ago. Channel 11 still does it to this day. And all of these stations have their own news bureau in addition to all the other things they do. Okay. Part of the public broadcasting also includes, and you're going to see everything is not just in Hebrew when we talk about what are the basic TV stations in Israel. The other one that is part of the public broadcasting unit is Makan. Makan means place in Arabic, and that is the public broadcasting service in Arabic. Channel 11 has both the regular broadcast and what we call chinuchit, the educational channel. It's geared towards children. It also sometimes serves as an auxiliary channel for special events. And its Arabic version, channel 33, is called Makan. Okay, so if you want to see public broadcasting in Arabic, channel 33 is your friend. The first commercial station in Israel, which I said opened in the early 1990s, was at the time Arutz 2, channel 2. Now it's channel 12. You can just quickly see that all the channels simply got a 1 at the beginning when we moved to digital. Channel 12 is now called, it's some people will still call it Arutz 2 because that's how they know it. It's now called in Hebrew literally Arutz 12, channel 12, 12. It's also known by its production company, which is called Keshet. Keshet happens to mean rainbow. That's the logo. It's a rainbow. What marked the beginning of commercial broadcast in Israel was also that the conditioning of getting free broadcasting rights in Israel, because these are all guaranteed to all households in Israel, is that a certain percentage of the shows that they would air on their TV station would be locally produced. So they would promote Israeli industry in film and TV. In addition, they would get preferable treatment with regards to broadcast rights and so forth, right? This is how the age of Israeli TV shows that have become popular around the world started with the advent of Israeli commercial television. So Keshet or Arutz 12 is the most popular TV station in Israel. It's 8 o'clock news is the most popular one. And I put next to all of these their websites. If you are in Israel, whether you have TV or not, you can access all of these channels for free via their websites. Okay, you don't need a TV. You don't even need Idan Plus to access them. If you have a computer or even on your phone, you can access all of these with their live streaming in Israel. If you're outside of Israel, it's not necessarily guaranteed. You might have to use a VPN to get around the IP rights with it, but just know that in Israel, you can look them up online and watch for free. Okay, the next commercial channel in Israel is, again, at the time, it was channel 10, Arutz 10. It turned into Arutz 13. Arutz 13 is also known as Reshet. Reshet is another production company. And this is also one of the big commercial mainstream channels. 11, 12, and 13 are all considered what I'm going to call mainstream. When I say mainstream is that if you watch the news, if you watch their news commentary, they represent everyone from the left to the right, religious, secular, men, women, Jews, Arabs. They do a lot of work to ensure that there's a diversity of voices and looks on their panels. So that's why I'm calling them mainstream, in that they try to represent as many people as possible. As opposed to that, there is a relatively new channel on the commercial scene, and it's called Arutz 14. Simple as that, 14. It's also known by the name Achshav, but most people call it in Israel Arutz 14. Arutz 14 is relatively new. It has a decidedly right-wing slant on its news coverage and its politics. It has a lot of, I think, what it would call traditional or Jewish-minded programming. Not to say that Khan or any of the other stations don't, but they have more airtime for it. But it very much paints itself as a more right-wing approach, claiming that 11, 12, and 13 are anything but. As someone who watches news and TV in Israel religiously, faithfully, I can tell you 11, 12, and 13 have a variety of voices, including right wing voices. When you're able to follow along better in Hebrew, you get to know the personalities and their different viewpoints. Another channel that is guaranteed to be watched in all of Israel, guaranteed broadcasting rights, is Arutz HaKnesset. Arutz HaKnesset is simply the Knesset channel. It's modeled off C-SPAN in that you will watch plenary and subcommittee meetings from the Knesset. You'll also hear from politicians and members of Knesset. You'll see documentaries and historical things about the Knesset and the government of Israel. It's a great website. It's a great thing to watch just in general to get the sense of how government works in Israel. Now we have a bunch of, we have 3 other channels that are guaranteed. These are all commercial. And these are more, I'm not going to say niche, but you're going to hear the difference in them. First off is Hala TV. Hala TV is the first commercial Arab TV station in Israel. It's an Israeli TV station that is commercial, and it's all in Arabic. It has its own original programming, including its own news. That's in addition to Makan, which is the public broadcaster in Arabic. So just like in Hebrew broadcasting, we have Khan, public, 12, 13, and 14 commercial. We have 33, which is public, and then Hala TV, which is commercial, also in Arabic. Arutz 24, which is also known as Musica 24, is a commercial music station. It, again, is modeled off another station you may have heard of, no longer around, at least in its original format, called MTV. And it is devoted solely to Israeli music videos, Israeli concerts, interviews with Israeli musicians, and so forth. Highly recommend watching it. And then finally, Arutz Tesha. Arutz Tesha is the commercial Russian station in Israel, again, with its own programming as well as programming from abroad, all catering to native Russian speakers and people wanting to learn Russian in Israel. It does have subtitles in Hebrew for some of its programming, just like the Arabic stations also will have subtitles for some of theirs in Hebrew. But these are the channels that make up Idan Plus, that change in going from analog to digital. And these are the channels that if you had a Mamil, or if you have any of the other TV providers in Israel, these are the basic channels that all services provide you. Okay. I highly recommend once you get this screen is to get the playlist is to go through these channels and find the one that works best for you. Language, style, approach, and so forth. Okay, let's get to some important words to understand what you're actually watching. Let me just move this out of the way here. So first off is a very important word, Madura. Mahadura or Mahadura, but you'll often hear it pronounced like Madura. Mahadura is an edition or a newscast. This is usually what we call the 8 o'clock news, right? The 8 o'clock news is the central news station show of all the major stations. Even Channel 12, again, the most watched in Israel, is called Hamadura Hamelkazit, the central edition or the central newscast, meaning they'll have news throughout the day, but this is the one that is the most watched, the most comprehensive, and it is. The news in Israel, by the way, can last anywhere from an hour to 2 hours. It usually stops at an hour and a half, but it can be any in that. Since October 7th, many of the commercial stations have been nonstop with the news and have stopped their original broadcasting. Some of it has come back slowly, but for example, the 8 o'clock news on Channel 12 is at least an hour and a half every night, because there's just that much to watch, especially if you haven't been watching it throughout the day. The person who's at the beginning, when the 8 o'clock news comes on or any of the other top of the hour news comes on, is a magish or magisha. Magish or Megisha is the presenter, right? It's the anchor. It's the person who is um, facilitating both the stories that are being told and in what order, and also if there's a live panel on TV, they're the ones facilitating it. Okay, Magish, male, Magisha, female. Lehagish means to present something. So this is the person who actually does the presenting, right? The presenter. Right? And everyone, by the way, in Israel has their personal favorite. Again, based on what channel you watch, you also have a preference for which Magish or Megisha you like. There's people who are team this versus team that. And again, it's by channel. Then you get into the various people who get on TV when it comes to the news. Katav or Katevet. A Katav, male, or a Katevet, female, is a reporter or a correspondent, right? Just like you have in news forms in other countries in the world, so too do we have here in Israel. So a Katav, male reporter or correspondent, Katevet, female correspondent or reporter, they're usually devoted to specific topics or regions. So for example, each of the major stations has their Katav or Katevet, Batzafon in the north versus Badarom in the south, especially during the war. Some have a Katav La'inyanei Tzava, a reporter for military affairs. Inyanei Tzava, Inyanim, affairs, Tzava, army, right? Or one about diplomacy or one about politics and so forth. You'll get to learn the different personalities, okay? But they are the reporter or the correspondent, as opposed to row 38. I'm going to jump just a second, is the Parshan or the Parshanit. Parshan or Parshanit will usually be also in the same category, right? You'll have one on military affairs or one for politics or one for government, but they're the commentator or the analyst. You're choosing to listen to them based on their opinions, their perspective, and also their access to news. But they're charged with giving an opinion or an analysis, not like the reporter or correspondent who's supposed to be neutral. And you will hear at the beginning, as the Magish or Magisha is going through each segment of the news, they'll introduce it by saying Katavenu, blah, 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 bashetach. Okay, excuse me. Or Katavatenu, blah, 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 bashetach. Or meaning our reporter, blah, 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 is their name in the field. Or Katavenu, blah, 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 medaveach. Our reporter so-and-so reports. Okay, so when you hear the term, you'll hear this all the time when you watch the news, and just to get a feel for it, but also to start listening and analyzing it, they're going to say katavenu or kataftenu, right? Our reporter, male or female, so-and-so, right? So you also get to learn the personalities, but it will be preceded by reporter. So we talked about a katav, we talked about a parshan, and what are some of the things that they talk about in the media, especially when we talk about the news? One is a chasifa. Chasifa is a very important thing, especially in Israel, where there's always breaking news. Everyone wants to be the first one to break the news. And one of the ways they do it is by announcing they have a chasifa. Chasifa is an expose. Lachsof, the verb from which the same root comes, means to expose. So chasifa is an exposure or expose, okay? Meaning first glance at something. Divuach is a report. Okay, duach is a physical report. Divuach is the verbal noun, the gerund of the verb ledaver, to report something. So if you see, for example, you're watching the news, as you will in the last 5 months, and it has a big a banner that says divuach colon nikudot time in Hebrew, but divuach, and then it says something in big letters, that means it's a breaking report or breaking news. Another way that they announce breaking news in Israel is they use the word mistamen. Mistamen, colon, followed by a headline, or the reporter or commentator or the presenter will use the term mistamen, which means it's looking likely. It comes from the same root, shoresh, samech mem nun, as the words for sign or signal or symbol. And the idea is it's pointing something is it's pointing towards or signifying that, right? So if it says, for example, as it said in the news last night, mistamen Hamas me'unyan be Hamas lo me'unyan be'iskat chatufim kerega. It's looking likely that Hamas lo me'unyan is not interested be'iskat chatufim in a exchange in a deal for the captives, right? That's how we use the word mistamen in terms of an estimation of the news bureau, or it's looking likely that, or it's something they can't necessarily report on because it's not official, but they already have word that it's about to be released or announced. That's how the word mistamen is used, but it's used a lot, especially in Israeli news. And then finally, if you watch the news long enough, and religiously enough, you'll see that each channel has what they call a magazine. Now, magazine is also the word that we use in everyday Hebrew for a magazine, as in a printed magazine, right? A publication that comes out once a week, every other week, once a month. By the way, if you try to get them from abroad in Israel, they are prohibitively expensive, and that comes from someone who very much has an addiction to all sorts of uh, political and arts and lifestyle magazines. So it's very frustrating. But magazine, when we're talking about TV, is usually an in-depth report, right? And you'll hear that term used a lot. Magazine shelanu al blah blah blah, and they'll say it as if it's a magazine that they're holding, but it's not. It's an in-depth report. Each channel has its own in-depth news show. In addition to its nightly news, might have a magazine on something, right? But that's the term that's used when, especially when it goes more in depth about something. Okay. We're going to break slightly from the news to talk about everyday content, meaning TV and movies. We're going to talk about it in terms of how you often consume it. First off, many of us watch a sidra, or let's be realistic, we watch starot. Sidra is a series, starot, series plural. Okay, but a sidra is a show, right? It's a show in that it's a series of episodes and seasons, which in Hebrew, a season is an ona. That's also the term that we use for the seasons outside in the weather. And a chapter, more likely when we're talking about news, TV, excuse me, an episode is called a perek, right? The same word that we use for a chapter of a book is also the term we use for a single episode of a show or of a series, right? Perek. Okay. Um, Plural is prakim, but we watch an episode of a show one at a time. Sometimes we binge prakim. Okay. What is contained in a TV show? That's not the news. First off is the alila. Alila is plot. Tasrit is script. This could be for TV or movie, even though the same root for tasrit, we get the word film in Hebrew, seret. Ktuviot, a very important thing for all of us learning Hebrew here or just trying to keep up, are subtitles. Many people, when they come to Israel, ask, is this a country that has subtitles or that does dubbing? And it's a very easy answer. With the exception of TV shows and certain animated shows, everything in Israel it has ktuviot. So if it's imported from abroad, it will have ktuviot. When you go to a movie theater in Israel, when you go to buy a ticket online before you get to the movie theater, it'll ask you and it will show you in the details what kind of film do you want to see. And if it has different options, it'll tell you what language the tuviot are in. Sometimes it's in Hebrew, sometimes it's in English and in Hebrew. That's usually only for things like at film festivals and at cinematheques, not at a commercial movie theater. But Ktuviot are important. It's also a great way to learn Hebrew, both because taped parts of the news and taped TV shows will always in Israel have Ktuviot in Hebrew, subtitles. It's also, by the way, a great thing to do if you have a subscription service like Netflix, where you can watch a show that you watch all the time in your native language, but turn on the subtitles in Hebrew if they're available to help better your Hebrew proficiency. All of that is in contrast to dibuv. Dibuv is dubbing a TV show, or if a show is medubav, medubev, as it says here, but it should be medubav. Medubav is dubbed. So if a show is dubbed, התוכנית מדובבת. Okay, but it has dibuv, meaning that Hebrew has been dubbed over the original language of, excuse me, what they were speaking on the show. Again, that is not a common thing in Israel. This is not certain European countries that do that, nor is this the United States. We do mostly tuviot, subtitles in Israel. Okay. If we're already talking about consuming content, afaka, the production, and bimui, the staging of something. Both important terms when we're talking about describing certain shows. For example, ahavti et hafaka shel hasidra. I loved the production of the series. Or ahavti et bimui shel haseret. I loved the staging of the film. Okay, hoping you can have conversations beyond what did you watch, but also why did you like a certain show. And these are the words that can use to help explain things, or like plot and script. What did you think of the plot? Ma chashavtem ala alila. What did you think about the plot? Okay. Basic question, just like you would ask, hopefully, when you're talking about describing or reviewing a film or a TV show to someone else, again, in your native language, in your home country, but here in Israel. Okay. Equally important, really quick as we're running out of time, shidur. Shidur is any kind of broadcast. Shidur chai, meaning literally a live broadcast, simply means live. So if it says at the top of the screen shidur chai, means it's a live broadcast. Shidur chozer is a returning broadcast, literally means returning broadcast, i.e. a rerun. And if something is muklat, it means it's recorded. This is very important, especially if you're watching the news and they're talking about a series of attacks, aerial attacks in the north and the south, and they show archival footage. It will say in big letters either muklat or azaka mukletet, that the air raid siren illustrating this specific situation is recorded, meaning you're not watching a shidur chai and you don't need to seek protection because this isn't live. Okay. And finally, some questions to ask, not just for those joining us this Wednesday on our in our Cafe Oleh conversations, but when we're talking about consuming content in general and consuming media, these are some of the questions you can ask. Obviously, there's many more to ask, like about news and things like that, but we're just talking about, let's say, a TV show or a sidra Netflix, right? A series that you watch on Netflix. Be'ezo ona at. Be'ezo ona at. Asking to a female, what season are you on? Right? Be'ezo ona at. This is a very casual way to ask, what season are you watching? But think about it how we ask this question in English or any other language, right? If it's a multi-season series, we often ask, oh, what are you up to? Right? Like, what season are you up to? Which is the way we're going to say it in terms of a episode. Ad eze perek higata. Okay, ad eze perek higat. That should be higat female. Don't know why it did that. Ad eze perek higat. Again, asking a female, what episode are you up to? Slightly different way to ask a similar question. Instead of what season are you on, what episode are you up to? Not just because we're changing the format of what size, but also how we're relating to the thing we're talking about. In this case, in Hebrew, it literally says, until which episode have you arrived? Right? But in English, we would say, what episode are you up to? Right? אני הגעתי עד הפרק האחרון. I got to the last episode. Okay, is one way you could answer that. A great way when we start asking and giving recommendations on what to watch. Very important, not just to have small talk, but also to expand our knowledge of things to watch, especially in Hebrew, to improve both our Hebrew and our knowledge of Israeli culture and society. מה ראית לאחרונה שאתה יכול להמליץ עליו? This is asking to a male. מה ראית לאחרונה? What have you seen or what did you see לאחרונה? And notice I use the verb ראית here, keeping it very casual. I could have said מה צפית לאחרונה and it would have been perfectly all right. But let's say you're talking to friends, right? You're not going to bust out with the fancy grammar. If you're talking to a colleague, maybe you want to say tsafita. But I put raita because I'm assuming you're talking to friends when asking this question. Ma raita la'achona. La'achona comes from the same root as the words like acharon, last. La'achona, though, means lately or last or recently. Okay. Ma ra'ita la'achona. What have you seen recently or the last thing that you've seen? She'ata yachol, that you can. Lehamlitz alav. Lehamlitz means to recommend, and it's followed by the preposition al. So, מה ראית לאחרונה שאתה יכול להמליץ עליו? What have you seen recently that you could recommend, or that you can recommend, or that you would recommend? Okay. Another question you can ask using the same vocabulary we have here. היית ממליץ על הסרט הזה? Again, using that same verb lehamlitz, to recommend. Hayita mamlitz. Would you recommend to a male? Al haseret hazeh. Would you recommend this film or that film? Remember that the words ze and zot are only different because of gender. Ze is masculine, zot is feminine. They mean both this and that. Okay, so if you ask, Hayita mamlitz al haseret hazeh, would you recommend that film? It also translates to, would you recommend this film? And then finally, to answer both of these questions, you would say, Ani mamlitz al, fill in the blank, or Ani mamlitza al. Ani mamlitz, male, Ani mamlitza, female. I recommend blah, 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 film or TV series or TV station or radio station, whatever it may be. Okay? Questions with the little bit of time we have in the Q&A. Let's get to some questions. Isn't mitzapeh to expect? Yes. Litzapot is to expect. Litzpot is to view or to watch something. When do you use lehazin as opposed to lishmoa? Like I said up here, it's the difference, like in English, between to hear and to listen. To hear is lishmoa. To listen is lehazin. Again, when do you use to hear in English versus to listen to in English? That's the difference between lishmoa and lehazin. What would to listen to music be? Ani mazin la música. Is I-24 News the only English channel in Israel? No, it's not. I-24 is not part of the list of channels that I showed you. It's not part of the public broadcasting, the broadcasting service that's included. There are some cable packages that do include it there. But that is, it is based in Israel, primarily for an abroad audience. And as such, it doesn't report on things that have to do with local news. So for example, national news will cover big traffic accidents or the price increase in certain foods or travel from Israel. Everyday things that happen to Israeli citizens. I-24 is built for an abroad audience, not a local one. And thus a lot of those things that impact our lives on a daily level in Israel aren't necessarily covered on I-24. What about playing a music video on YouTube or playing a Cafe Oleh video on YouTube? Great question. You would say, Ani tzofe besirton shel Cafe Oleh. I'm watching a Cafe Oleh video on YouTube, or Ani makrin, right? As in I'm screening a Cafe Oleh video. But when we use the verb screening lehakrin, it usually means that there's an audience where we're projecting it onto something. אני משמיע סרטון video. Silton video is a music video, or we can also say clip, like the English clip is in a music video clip. Ani mashmia musica, but mashmia has to do with playing audio. So it doesn't really work with YouTube. You can say there is YouTube music, right? Ani mashmia musica, but YouTube video, the YouTube music. That absolutely works for the verb lashmia, right? Isn't frequency tadirut? What is afik versus tadirut? Again, technical terms, afik is used by the stations themselves often to describe the channel. It is much to do with frequency as it just simply the number that's assigned to it, but just know it's arutz or afik. Usually arutz is the one that we use here. Would you use ulpan for a dance studio? Yes, ulpan lemechol. Ulpan is any kind of studio. It could be a dance studio, it could be a pottery studio, it could be a photography studio. Anything is an ulpan. That's a studio. Is reshet also a verb as in networking? No. Reshet is a network, noun. Networking is how we say networking in Hebrew, mainly because networking, as the phenomenon we know in other countries in the world, doesn't really exist the same way in Israel. That gets into my daytime job where I talk about interpersonal communication, intercultural communication, and career development. Networking doesn't exist in Israel in the same way. But no, reshet is a noun, not a verb. What is the difference between lahakshiv and lahazin? Are both to listen, or is there a nuanced difference? Yes. Lahakshiv is to pay attention. Lahazin is to listen to. So again, in English, we have the difference. In Hebrew, we have the difference. Lahakshiv, to pay attention. Lahazin, to listen to. What about a network of friends? Reshet shel chaverim, or chavura shel chaverim. But you can say a network of friends. Reshet shel chaverim. Or simply yesh li hamon chaverim. Or you would say this more like in the context of yesh li reshet shel chaverim bechama medinot. I have a network of friends in several countries. Since we're not yet fluent in watching Hebrew channels, are there English channels we can enjoy while in the country? 100%. And this is a great question. Again, listen to what I said about these channels here. These are the channels that whether you watch TV for free or on cable or satellite are guaranteed to be viewed in Israel. In addition to these channels, obviously, if you belong to a certain internet TV cable station or satellite one, you'll get 20, 30, 100, 200 more channels, including native English speaking ones like news channels, like sports channels, like documentary channels. I'm talking about Israeli made broadcasting channels that are guaranteed to all households in Israel. These are the guys in Hebrew, Arabic, and Russian. I-24 is not included in this list. Some of the broadcast, the internet companies may include I-24 in their package. They will also include original programming in English and other languages from around the world as part of their package. So when you turn on a TV in a hotel room in Israel, you're not just seeing these channels. You're seeing all sorts of other things, including original programming in English that's not Israeli. That's the point here. These are all Israeli production and TV stations. Does Israel have cable stations like the US, or is there an option to pay for cable stations from abroad? Absolutely. Again, I didn't go into the different cable stations, cable companies in Israel, but there are at least 10 different ones right now. YouTube, Wikipedia, excuse me, has a list of all of them. I didn't want to do a commercial for the different cable companies. They all have different packages. They all have different channels that are included. Again, all the cable companies will include these channels. These are the basic channels in Israel. We can call it. But very good question. Um, sorry, just skipping around. Can one access these stations in the US? Like I answered before, if you have a VPN, you should be able to. Otherwise, some of them are available abroad, some of them are not. You might need to use a VPN. Why do I still see Reshet Bet when I'm on the internet? Great question. I did not include in this list of TV stations all the radio stations that are part of Idan Plus. Idan Plus is not just digital TV, it's also digital radio. And there are certain radio stations that are part of this package that everyone is entitled to by turning on the radio, one of which is Reshet Bet. Reshet Bet is an all news station that is part of Khan, the public broadcaster. They have several other channels and they're all there. You can listen to all of these online via their website, khan.org.il. In fact, when you go to their website, it'll pop up and it'll say on the top TV, radio. And under radio, you'll see multiple options. You can stream live all of these in addition to turning on a radio. Do any channels present early morning or midday news broadcasts? Yes, since October 7th, all of the major stations are still showing news live around the clock. Some of them will take breaks because they need to fill up airtime or there isn't enough news that day. But usually, at least on channel 12, I can speak for 11 and 13, they'll start playing the news from about noon or 1 o'clock or even 2 o'clock through the end of the day. And any sort of major commercial broadcasting or commercial show that they're showing that isn't the news will be after the major news at 8 o'clock. I was taught in Ulpan that Kalyan is an anchor, but you are saying Magish. What is the difference? Great question. A Kalyan is a narrator. It comes from the verb likro, to read. And the idea originally was that the kalyan wasn't actually a news, doesn't have a background in journalism. They read the news. Old school Israeli TV, if you watch it, and the guy whose nickname is Mar Televizia, Mr. TV, he's still alive. His name is Chaim Yavin. He was the kalyan for Arutz Harishon. He was the news narrator, the anchor for many years, but he read from a script. He had some background in journalism, but the difference between a magish and a kalyan is simply they're not just reading from a script, they're also facilitating a live panel. Oftentimes, they're also doing their own reporting. And that's the difference. And we usually call them magish or magisha nowadays, not a kalyan or kalyanit. That's an old-fashioned term. Who sells the Mamil? Electronic stores, Bezek. You can look it up on Idan Plus's website as well. I don't remember the cost of them. Do these free stations have mobile access? I've answered that before. The answer is yes. Is there an Israeli ESPN? Absolutely. It's called Arutz Sport, sport channel. It's often called Arutz Sport Chamesh or Chamesh Plus because it often fell as number 5, as channel number 5. But absolutely, and just like ESPN, it's per cable company that you work with. Is it looking likely to rain? Mistamen. Yes, that is a great use of the verb mistamen. Mistamen sheyered geshem machar, or mistamen sheyored geshem hayom. It's looking likely that it's going to rain today or tomorrow. So how is the verb mistamen is not likely used in an example? That's subject plus mistamen. We only use mistamen as something going to happen. We don't usually negate that verb. We can negate what comes after mistamen. Can I subscribe to most US streaming networks in Israel? You would need to check with them. I don't know the answer to that. What is the main reason Israel does not dub TV shows and movies with real actors? They only tend to do it animated and kids projects for the same reason that a lot of other countries don't do it. There are various reasons for it, certainly in English, certainly in Israel. If you ask people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, they'll tell you, I learned my English by watching American TV shows. And it used to be that Channel 1 was the one that not only had original Israeli shows. They also showed The Cosby Show and Seinfeld and 90210 and all these other shows that when you ask a native Israeli how they got their English and especially an American sounding accent, it's because they watch TV. You wouldn't get that if it got dubbed. I don't know if that necessarily answers, but it gives a good reason why Israeli shows should, foreign shows in Israel should not be dubbed. It's also a way people can learn another language. Why do you need to end the sentence with alav? Let me get back to that. These sentences are not the question I think you're asking. The verb lahamlitz, to recommend, is always followed by the preposition al. Always. Ani mamlitz al. I recommend. Ani mamlitz al haseret hachadash hazeh. I recommend that new film. Okay, lahamlitz is always followed by the preposition al. What is the last thing, or what's the thing that you've seen recently that you could recommend, on which you could recommend? Right? That's how we would say it in English. We've talked about prepositions being at the end of things. In questions, it's okay in Hebrew. Typically, you don't end sentences with prepositions in Hebrew, just like you don't in English. Are there any news channels in Israel with English subtitles? No. There is I-24, which is produced in Israel, but is not for a local audience, in that you're not going to get as much local content as you will from the big stations. What about playing a podcast? You use lehazin? Yes, ani mazin la podcast azet. Podcast, by the way, there are proper Hebrew terms for it, but we only say podcast. Actor who's in the film, cast, I'm going to add these all to the vocabulary list. Thank you for reminding me. I'll put that in here. Lahakshiv is to pay attention to, it is not to listen. Someone asked that, but that's a great question. Is there programming on other than news on the free channels? Sorry if I didn't make this clear. Channel 11, 12, and 13 show regular programming, folks. We talk about these in the context of news because that's what the Medurat HaShevet was, sitting around getting information. These all have their own TV shows, folks. All the famous Israeli TV shows you've heard of come from these three stations, 11, 12, and 13. Shtisel, Betipul, Sauda, all of these come from these stations, folks. They're not some other station. They're all the same thing. We don't have CNN in Israel. We have channel 11, 12, 13, and 14, and the Arabic stations that do both news and programming. Think of it like NBC News in America and NBC original programming. It's the exact same thing in America. I don't know if you know this, why we are limited to choices available on Amazon, Netflix. Someone's asking, why are we limited in Israel to choices available on Amazon, Netflix? That has to do with the distribution agreement. I used to work in film production, so I can answer this. When you produce and then distribute, whether it's a film or a TV, you and the production and the distribution company decide where this is going to be distributed based on marketing and commercial interests. So if it's not distributed in Israel, that mainly means that they didn't have the means to create the Israeli, the Hebrew subtitles, or they don't think it'll do as well there, and it's not as big of a market as opposed to Western Europe or North America or other places. And that's the reason why it's not distributed in Israel. Quick answer to that. So I answered the question. Originally, you said you did not use Ro'eh for seeing, for looking at TV, and then I said I do. I explained that when I went over these questions to say that this question is in the context of speaking with friends. When you're speaking with friends, you're speaking casually, just like English and other languages have casual language, so too does Hebrew. And I'm not going to say to my friends, unless I'm trying to be a little snobby, and let's be honest, I am a little snobby, and my friends can attest to that. And I probably would say matzafita lachona. But if I'm just talking and it comes naturally, mara ita lachona, when I'm between friends, not colleagues, not someone I'm trying to impress, is perfectly all right. right? It's like saying in English, what did you see versus what did you watch? What did you watch is correct in English. Matzafita is correct in Hebrew. But we still say Maraita, what did you see? That's the difference between these two. Okay. I'm sorry I didn't get to everyone's questions here. And the person who's getting into politics with me over the various channels, this is not the place for it. And I'm sorry you took it to that place. This is not about politics. This is about how we get different accesses. And I gave you the basic channels here. All of them, like I said, the mainstream ones have a variety of voices and a large viewership. You can see that in the ratings. Don't need to argue over that. So we're at overtime. Toda rabah. Thank you all for joining. Next week, we are, let me just make sure about next week, what we are going over. Next week, great class. We've requested multiple times to go over bills. Next week, we're going to do something even more ambitious, but no less important. Whether you are employed or not, we are going to go over how to read a pay slip in Israel. It is one of the most complicated things to ever receive in Israel. Even if you are not employed in Israel, even if you are retired, it's an important lesson because you're going to learn a lot of valuable financial words and how we understand things like taxes and deductions in Hebrew. So, toda rabah, thank you all for joining. This class will be up in the next day. Those of you joining us on Wednesday for our conversation class, you'll get it in time with the vocabulary to be able to discuss the topic at hand, which is how do you recommend books, TV, movies, music, and so forth. And for everyone else, I will see you all next week. Lehitraot.